Aisha Bennett adjusted the sleeve of her navy tracksuit and stepped out of her car, her eyes rising to the polished glass facade of Lux Emporium. The mid-morning sun spilled gently across Rodeo Drive, brushing the tops of designer storefronts like gold leaf. She paused for a breath. It wasn't nerves, it was memory. Today marked 10 years since the first time she'd signed her name next to David's, and she wanted to commemorate it in their style, quiet, meaningful, lasting. That meant the Montclair fountain pen, limited edition, sapphire blue enamel. A piece that wrote like a whisper, just like David had when he told her, "Forever isn't loud. It's steady." Aisha was a black woman in her early 40s, proud of her skin, her roots, and her journey. She didn't wear diamond studs or branded heels. Her sneakers were clean, purposeful. Her curls were pulled back into a soft bun. Around her neck, a small silver pendant shaped like a quill hung beside a charm engraved simply for D. Always. She touched it gently before heading toward the entrance. Inside, the boutique smelled of leather, citrus polish, and coolness. The kind of cold that didn't come from air conditioning, it came from centuries of not expecting people like her. A jazz instrumental floated low above, but the silence between notes echoed louder. At the main counter, a young white woman in a tailored blazer looked up from her phone. Her smile, if it could be called that, hovered somewhere between politeness and habit. "Good morning," Aisha offered, her voice even. "I'm looking for a Montclair fountain pen, the limited blue enamel." The woman blinked once, eyes flicking over Aisha's outfit with professional swiftness. "Those require an appointment," she said. "Oh, I didn't realize. Would it be possible to check if anyone canceled?" The woman tapped her tablet. "Name Aisha Bennett." A moment passed. The screen glowed softly in her hands. Then a slow, crisp shake of the head. "I'm afraid I don't see you on the list. We're fully booked today." Aisha had heard that tone before. Calm, surface-level polite, but cold underneath. Like she wasn't supposed to be here. Like her presence wasn't congruent with the soft velvet chairs and crystal-etched display cases. Her skin didn't match the silver trays. Her sneakers didn't echo the marble floor the right way. "I see," Aisha said, nodding once. Her voice didn't break. She wouldn't let it. She turned without another word. The soft whoosh of the automatic door met her like wind in a canyon. The guard standing nearby didn't need a signal. He stepped aside preemptively, like her leaving was a relief. Back on the sidewalk, Rodeo Drive sparkled as if nothing had happened. A couple walked past, arms full of pastel shopping bags, laughing. A Bentley idled across the street. She stepped to the side and breathed in slowly, as if trying to remind her chest how to rise again. Just then she heard a voice. "Hey," it said. A man, black, maybe mid-30s, stood near the flower stand. "They wouldn't even let you ask, huh?" She looked over, surprised. "Don't worry," he added. "Happens to my wife, too. You'd think her PhD would change things. It doesn't." Aisha's lips lifted slightly, not quite a smile, but close. She nodded. "Name's Reggie," the man said, holding out a hand. "You want coffee? There's a spot down the block where people know how to look you in the eye." Aisha glanced back at the boutique's cold facade, then down at her own hands. "Sure," she said. "Why not?" As they walked, the flower vendor, an older woman with a wide sun hat, touched Aisha's arm gently. "You were graceful," she said, voice soft with something like recognition. "Don't let them shrink you." Aisha nodded, the weight in her chest shifting. Not gone, but lighter. And as they turned the corner, the boutique faded behind them, just another shop with glass too thick to hear the truth from the sidewalk. Because she hadn't gone there to be seen. She'd gone there to remember. And now she remembered something else, too. Sometimes even rejection points you toward the people who really see you. And the Montclair pen. It could wait. Tomorrow was still coming. And so was Ethan. Aisha Bennett had barely stepped back onto the sidewalk when a flicker of movement caught her eye through the pristine glass of Lux Emporium's front window. The sales associate, Claire Whitman, now stood beside a tall, suited man with silver hair and an expression like carved marble. Edward Langston's store manager, his photo had once been in a local magazine Aisha read at her dentist's office, framed beside headlines like, "Luxury is an experience." Now his arms were crossed, and his pale blue eyes narrowed as he watched her retreat down Rodeo Drive. She didn't need to hear them to know what they were saying. Her clothes, her face, her skin, all the justification they needed. Reggie had gone ahead toward the cafe, giving her space. But something tugged at her. This wasn't just about a pen anymore. It was about a pattern she'd faced her whole life, the invisible line between welcome and tolerated. Between being helped and being handled. Between glass that let you look in and glass that kept you out. And right now that line was drawn in 24-karat trim across the Emporium's windows. She turned, walked back inside. Claire's mouth tensed slightly. "Ma'am, as I mentioned, we are booked for the day." "I'm not here to argue," Aisha said calmly. "But I would like the name of the regional manager, or the ownership office." Edward stepped forward. "Is there a problem?" His tone was crisp, practiced. "I believe I've been treated unfairly," Aisha said, voice steady. "And I'd like to understand your store's appointment policy, specifically how it applies to walk-ins because your website doesn't mention it." Edward's expression didn't change. Walk-ins are considered on a case-by-case basis. Meaning when time allows, when presentation allows. There it was. Presentation. "You mean when someone looks the part," she said. He didn't reply. Claire looked slightly away. Aisha, a proud black woman with deep brown skin and a bearing that had carried her through boardrooms and broken elevators alike, let the silence settle around her. She had no intention of raising her voice. She had learned long ago that sometimes your calm was your power. That dignity could be louder than shouting. "I'd still like the number," she repeated. Edward scribbled it on a card without looking up and handed it across the counter. His hand didn't brush hers. As she turned to leave, a young Latina employee by the name of Jasmine Reed watched from the far counter. She'd seen the way Claire's posture had shifted the moment Aisha walked in. Had seen the quiet way the guard had hovered. Jasmine had worked here 6 months and had never once seen anyone turned away for asking about a pen. Later in the break room, she would whisper to a coworker, "You could feel it, you know." The moment she walked in, like they decided who she was without even listening. Back outside, the sun was still warm, but Aisha felt it differently now. Not harsh, not indifferent. Just honest. It didn't pretend to welcome you. It simply existed. And in its light, so did she. As she walked down the block, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan board meeting wrapped early. "Call when you're free." Thinking about lunch at the Ivy, she smiled, small, tired, but real. Then typed, "Sounds perfect. Have something to tell you." But just as she slipped the phone back into her bag, she heard a voice, quiet, accented, and urgent. "Ma'am." "Excuse me." "Ma'am," she turned. An older white woman in a wide-brimmed hat stood holding a bouquet of peonies. "I saw what happened back there," she said, "and I just want you to know, I've been shopping on this street for 30 years. That was not standard." Aisha gave her a gentle nod. "Thank you." The woman reached into her bag and pulled out something small, A gold Montclair catalog creased at the corner. "My husband bought me one for our anniversary," she said. "It's just a pen. But what you carried when you walked in, that was more than a pen." That was grace. The woman handed Aisha the catalog. "Don't let them teach you to expect less." Aisha stood still for a long beat after she walked away. Then slowly she slipped the catalog into her purse. In a world of glass walls and gilded smiles, sometimes the smallest crack let the light in. And somewhere behind her, Jasmine was still watching a knot forming quietly in her chest. Not of guilt, but of recognition. Because once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Aisha Bennett walked slowly, her sneakers brushing against the clean sidewalk of Rodeo Drive. The sun was higher now, and the late morning crowd was beginning to gather. The boutique windows gleamed their reflections, casting her image back at her. A woman in a navy tracksuit, brown skin glowing against the Californian light hair, neatly tied, chin lifted just so. She looked composed. But beneath that still surface was the quiet hum of emotion, disappointment, clarity, and something else, a kind of defiant grace. She had not gone into Lux Emporium to make a scene. She had gone to honor a decade of love. But what she received was the age-old lesson too many women of color know too well, that dignity must often walk alone. As she turned down the quieter part of the block, the clamor of Rodeo softened. There were fewer people here, just a small florist cart at the corner, and the faint sound of a street musician warming up a saxophone in the distance. The sidewalk here was cracked in places, less polished, more real. Aisha paused near a bus stop bench and took a seat. She closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the day soak into her skin. Not as armor, but as permission. Permission to breathe. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. But she did feel. Deeply. A few minutes passed before she noticed someone approaching from the side. Reggie Coleman, whom she had met only minutes earlier, was walking toward her with 2 paper cups in hand. "Medium roast, no cream," he said, offering one. "I guessed." She accepted it with a nod. "You guessed right." They sat together in silence for a while, sipping coffee. The kind of silence that doesn't press, doesn't ask for explanation, just presence. "You ever get tired of being the better person?" Reggie asked eventually, his tone more thoughtful than bitter. Aisha gave a quiet laugh. "It's not about being better. It's about knowing who I am before they try to decide for me." He nodded slowly. "Still feels heavy sometimes." She looked at him then. Young, but not naive. Worn, but still open. A black man navigating the same spaces she did in a world that offered glass doors, but not always open ones. "They don't expect people like us to show up in places like that," she said. "And when we do, they pretend it's about rules. They expect quiet," he added. "Compliance, disappearance." "I stopped giving them that luxury," she said, the warmth of the coffee seeping into her fingers. A moment passed before Reggie pulled something from his pocket, a small notebook worn at the edges. He flipped to the last page and held it out to her. It was a sketch, rough but striking, of a storefront window, but instead of glass, it was a mirror. And inside the reflection stood a woman in a tracksuit, her head held high, surrounded not by pens or velvet cases, but by books, children, community. "That's how I saw you," he said. "Thought you should know." Aisha looked at it quietly. "You an artist on the side. Mostly youth work now. South LA schools." She smiled. "Makes sense." They sat longer than they meant to. At one point a pigeon waddled by, eyeing their crumbs. The street musician down the block began a slow, bluesy rendition of "Ain't No Sunshine." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Eventually, Aisha checked her watch. I should go. Ethan's waiting. Reggie stood. Your husband. She nodded. He doesn't know yet. About what happened. You gonna tell him eventually, she said. Not because I need him to fix it, but because silence can turn into permission. And I don't want to give them that. He offered his hand again. This time she took it firmly. Happy anniversary, he said. She smiled. Thanks. As she walked back toward the street where Ethan was due to pick her up, Aisha didn't feel defeated. She felt tuned, aligned, like the truth of the morning had cleared some fog inside her. And just before she rounded the corner, she looked back once toward the flower cart, the cracked sidewalk, and the man with the sketchbook. In a world full of silence, sometimes what stays with you is not the insult, but the hand that reached back. The restaurant was tucked behind a row of flowering jacaranda trees, its whitewashed walls glowing softly in the afternoon sun. The Ivy on Robertson had always been one of Ethan and Aisha Bennett's places, a spot not for show but for quiet celebration. When Aisha stepped onto the flagstone path, she could already see Ethan, seated at their favorite corner table on the patio. He wore a linen shirt, sleeves rolled phone set face down, beside a glass of iced tea. His blonde hair caught the light, but it was his posture, upright, attentive, warm, that made her slow her steps. He looked up and smiled, standing as she approached. There's my girl. Aisha returned the smile, though a little softer than usual. She kissed his cheek and sat down, placing her purse gently beside her chair. The server, a young black woman with a cheerful smile and purple nails, poured her water without question. For a moment, the normalcy soothed her. So Ethan asked, "Did you get it?" She hesitated. "No," she said simply. Ethan frowned. "Sold out." "No," she repeated, then told him. Everything. The way Claire had looked at her, the way Edward had dismissed her, the forced smile the card handed without contact. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't have to. Ethan listened in silence, his jaw tight, hands folded on the table. "I don't need you to fix it," she said. "I just needed you to know." He nodded, his voice low. "I'm glad you told me." The server returned to take their orders, and Aisha noticed the subtle way the woman addressed her, first direct, respectful, grounded. It felt like a small affirmation in a day of erasure. Lunch passed with long pauses between words. They didn't need to talk much. They had practiced this kind of companionship for years, the kind where silence spoke, where breathing together was its own kind of answer. But when the check came, something unexpected happened. Instead of the usual handwritten thank you note tucked into the leather folder, there was a slip of printed paper folded twice. Aisha opened it. "We saw what happened at Lux. You handled it with grace. If you ever want the pen, it's on us." There was no signature. Just a tiny logo at the bottom, Penchant Quarterly, a literary magazine she subscribed to, one she'd contributed to anonymously once years ago under a pseudonym. Somehow, someone had connected the dots. She stared at the note. Ethan leaned in. "You okay?" She folded the slip carefully and tucked it into her purse. "I'm not sure how they knew." "You've always been seen, Aisha," Ethan said quietly. "Just not always by the people in the front room." Later that evening, back at their home in the hills, a modest, modern place with warm wood floors and books in every room. Aisha sat in her office, the light dim, her favorite jazz vinyl humming low in the background. She opened her email and found a new message. From Jasmine, read luxemporium.com. Subject, today. Hi, Ms. Bennett. I know we didn't speak, but I watched everything that happened. I want to say I'm sorry. Not just for the way they treated you, but for how I stood there and didn't say anything. I've seen it before. Too many times. I just wanted to say your presence changed something in me today. Thank you. Jasmine Aisha read the email 3 times. Her eyes didn't tear up, but her breath caught in her throat for a long moment. She replied simply, "Thank you for seeing." That night, she and Ethan sat on the back patio, the city lights blinking below like quiet applause. They sipped herbal tea legs, touching no television, no phone screens. "Do you remember what you told me the day after our first date?" she asked. He smiled. "I remember a lot of things about that day. You said, 'Your name feels like a story waiting to be told.'" He nodded. "Still does." Aisha leaned back and looked up at the stars. "Then maybe it's time I told it. Because sometimes the weight of your name isn't just what you carry, it's what you choose to lift for those who come after." The next morning, the sun filtered through marine layer clouds, casting a soft gray light over Beverly Hills. Lux Emporium opened precisely at 10, just as it did every day, with its glass doors polished, its display cases lit in warm gold, and its staff dressed like mannequins in tasteful neutrals. Claire Whitman arrived early, brushing a stray blonde hair behind her ear as she entered. Edward Langston was already there, standing near the Montclair display, straightening a row of pens that were already perfectly aligned. Neither of them noticed Jasmine Reed pause at the door before clocking in. The young black associate stood still for a breath, then stepped inside her shoulders, straighter than usual. By 10:15, the first customers trickled in, older couples browsing slowly, tourists taking photos from the sidewalk. At 10:22, the front door opened again, and in walked Ethan Bennett, dressed in a soft gray blazer, jeans, and a navy shirt. His expression was neutral, pleasant even. But behind him stepped someone who made Claire's breath catch. Aisha Bennett. Poised, unapologetic, brown-skinned and beautiful, dressed in a cream blouse and dark trousers, curls pinned in place, silver pendant shining at her collarbone. Not a hair out of place. But the weight in her eyes, that was different. That was thunder held in stillness. Edward looked up from the counter. "Can I help you?" His tone was clipped professional. Ethan answered, "Yes. I believe you met my wife yesterday." Edward blinked. "Pardon." Aisha stepped forward, voice smooth. "You didn't know my name then. Let me repeat it for you, Aisha Bennett." Edward paled slightly. Ethan continued, casually pulling a slim black folder from his jacket. "We thought we'd stop by. I purchased controlling shares in Whitestone Holdings last quarter. Your parent company." Claire's hand froze over the register. Edward didn't speak. Aisha turned to Jasmine, who was standing near the Montclair display. "Hi," Aisha said. "You're Jasmine, right?" Jasmine nodded, eyes wide. "Your email meant more than you know," Aisha said gently. Claire finally found her voice. "Mrs. Bennett, we sincerely apologize. There's been a misunderstanding." "No." Aisha cut in softly. "There was no misunderstanding. There was a judgment. One you made the moment I walked through that door in sneakers and brown skin." Edward tried to recover. "We hold all our guests to the same standard." "Your standard," Ethan replied, "is about to change." He handed the folder to Edward, who opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a formal directive from Whitestone Holdings' executive office. Effective immediately, Lux Emporium's staff would undergo mandatory equity and inclusion training, and a new oversight team advised by Aisha herself would be appointed to review hiring and service practices across all locations. Claire's name was highlighted under pending review, and Ethan added, We're donating 100 Montclair pens to a scholarship fund for young writers of color in South LA. Aisha's idea. Claire stammered. But the brand. Reputation. Aisha smiled not cruelly, but with quiet steel. Reputation is what people think you are. Legacy is what you build when they're no longer watching. Silence fell. Then behind the counter, Jasmine straightened her posture. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, "would you like to see the pen?" Aisha nodded. Jasmine walked to the case, unlocked it, and brought out the sapphire blue Montclair, setting it on a velvet cloth. It was perfect. Aisha picked it up, testing its weight in her hand. Then she took the order form and signed Aisha L. Bennett. Edward watched mute. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She just turned to Jasmine and said, "Thank you. Truly." And with that, she and Ethan left. The door closed behind them with a soft whoosh. Outside, the light had shifted. Sun cut through the gray, now spilling across the pavement in long, steady stripes. A small crowd had gathered, unnoticed shoppers, a few store employees from neighboring boutiques. One man had captured the moment on video. He didn't film it for scandal or spectacle. He filmed it because he knew what justice looked like when it was done with elegance. The video would be posted within the hour. By evening, it would have over 3 million views. Not because of drama, but because a black woman walked into a store that didn't want her and rewrote the ending. And at that same moment across town, a young girl in a public school library held a donated Montclair pen in her hand. She didn't know the full story yet, but she would. The air that evening in Laurel Canyon was warm and fragrant with blooming night jasmine. Aisha Bennett sat on the back patio of her home, wrapped in a soft cream shawl, the lights of Los Angeles blinking faintly below like quiet stars. A fire crackled in the low pit before her, casting gold onto the pages of the leather-bound journal open on her lap. In her hand she held the Montclair pen, deep sapphire blue, with rose-gold accents glinting every time the flames shifted. She hadn't written anything yet. Not because she didn't have the words, but because she understood now the waiting had been part of the becoming. Inside the house was quiet. Ethan had poured them both a glass of wine and left her alone for this moment. He knew she needed it, just as he had known instinctively not to speak for her at the store earlier that day unless she gave him the space to do so. Their marriage was not one of saving or stepping in, it was of standing beside. A notification blinked on her phone screen beside the journal. Another message. Hundreds had come in since the video had gone viral that morning. Friends from Howard University, former students from the adult writing workshop she once led in Inglewood, even strangers, mostly women of color, thanking her for what she represented for walking in and not walking out. But one message stood apart. From Jasmine Reed. Subject, first steps, Mrs. Bennett, I wanted you to know I gave notice today. I realized I was working at a place that didn't align with who I want to become. I applied for a position at Penchant Quarterly. They're looking for editorial interns. I used to think no one would read what I wrote. Now I know better. Thank you for helping me see myself differently. With respect, Jasmine. Aisha read it twice, then 3 times. She smiled, small, proud, and a little bit in awe. It wasn't just about the store. It never had been. It was about the ripple, the echo. The quiet revolution started not with raised fists, but with standing still and saying no more. She dipped the pen to ink for the first time and wrote across the clean page, "Legacy is not what we leave behind. It's who we lift while we're here." Then she wrote another line, and another. The door slid open behind her, and Ethan stepped out barefoot, carrying a folded blanket and her favorite almond cookies. He placed them beside her, kissed her temple, and sat on the other chair across from her. "Writing the next one?" he asked. She looked up. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just starting to live the first one fully." He raised his glass. "To stories we write ourselves." She clinked her glass to his, then looked down at her words drying on the page. Later that week, she would visit a community center in South LA, where the first batch of donated Montclair pens had arrived. She would watch young students, brown and black and brilliant, unwrap the velvet cases as if opening treasure. She would listen to one boy recite a poem he'd written for his grandmother. And she would see a mural in progress on the back wall painted in bold strokes by the youth arts collective Reggie worked with. One panel would show a woman in a cream shawl holding a blue pen like a torch. Aisha wouldn't cry, but she would feel it rise in her chest, the knowing. Back at home, she'd place Jasmine's email in a folder she labeled Lightkeepers. She would open a second journal and begin outlining a new project, the Ink Initiative, a mentorship and grant program for young writers from marginalized communities. Her first call would be to Penchant Quarterly, and months from now she'd walk into a bookstore and see her book Glass Walls and Gilded Smiles on the new and noteworthy table. The photo on the back would be simple, just her face bare and true, her name spelled without compromise. Aisha Bennett, a black woman, a wife, a storyteller, a witness. She would sign each copy with the Montclair pen, and she would never forget what it meant to be told you don't belong, so she could make sure someone else never had to hear those words in silence. The fire on the patio burned lower now, soft and steady. Aisha leaned back her journal, resting beside her ink, still fresh. Above the hills, the sky was deepening to indigo, and she whispered not to Ethan, not to herself, but to the space that had once tried to shrink her, "I was always enough." And the night, in its quiet certainty, seemed to whisper back, "We know." When the firelight dimmed, and Aisha's pen finally touched paper, it wasn't just ink that flowed. It was years of silence, resilience, and quiet dignity distilled into words. In that soft glow beneath a sky deepening to indigo, a black woman who had once been overlooked found not just her voice, but a legacy, a gentle reckoning, wrapped in grace. Stories like Aisha's remind us that injustice rarely shouts. It often whispers in subtle refusals, measured tones, and sideways glances. But it can be undone not always through grand gestures, but through presence, truth, and the unwavering decision to stand firm. The lesson then is simple and ancient. Do not judge by the cover or the coat or the color of someone's skin. Every person you meet is a library you haven't read yet, and some of the finest volumes come without gold on the spine. It's easy, especially with age, to think the world no longer shifts. But it does with every small act of decency, every name spoken with respect, every young voice told, "You belong." Like a single lamp left in a darkened window, kindness, quiet, consistent, still has the power to guide us home. So tonight, take a moment. Think of the spaces where you've felt unseen and the people who helped you feel real again. Then be that light for someone else. If this story moved you, let it live on, not just in memory, but in action. Share it with a neighbor, a grandchild, or someone who's still finding their place. After all, the truest stories aren't just told, they're lived quietly, like ink settling on a page.